crowd here may not also be very good ground for politicians. I'm telling you, tuko na watu hapa wamekula kitabu. A number of academicians. I am seeing a number of vice chancellors from both private and public universities. We are seeing top technocrats and businessmen in the country. And of course, there's the residents of this particular area, family and friends.
We cannot say that because we have seen how people have given their own relations here. That shows that they are ready to welcome these
political conversations.
Because when former President Uhuru Kenyatta walked in, you saw the kind of clubs. I think these are villagers appreciating him that you are the man who identified our son.
Yes.
And therefore, they'll be also very important to just listen to his speech if you'll get time. That is.
We have also seen Jubilee-affiliated politician Jeremiah Kioni just walk in Masame when you are to us. Yes.
Legally, he's still the Secretary General. He was out yesterday, but he says he's staying put, and therefore, if he gets an opportunity, he'll have to clarify that.
Remember how we said we start politics immediately after a general election? So that is what Jeremiah Kioni is currently dealing with in his interim. But Masame, you had mentioned that Uhuru Kenyatta is the person who identified the talent and the man that was the late Professor George Magoha. I would also want to know, perhaps George Magoha received very good support from the then President Uhuru Kenyatta, because it is one thing to be a cabinet secretary. It is another thing to have all the support that you need, especially in such a high-profile docket, such a very highly sensitized docket, a docket of education. And so as Uhuru Kenyatta will be making his speech as a former president, it will be something that we will want to look out for is whether he will let us know the kind of support that he went over and above in ensuring that Professor Magoha got all that he wanted. Remember, Professor Magoha comes across as a tough negotiator. Perhaps he would call the president and tell him, now we need 1, 2, 3, 4. These are some of the talk points that we'd want to imagine President Uhuru Kenyatta will be talking on. As I noted earlier, Professor Magoha was able to successfully put up structures, put up a plan, put up budget advice to the government, and this was evident when President Uhuru Kenyatta's regime rather would put out their budgets or even their supplementary budgets allocation. Education was always winning, so there was a lot of support and perhaps a lot of groundwork or behind the scenes going on, and we would want to imagine that ex-President Uhuru Kenyatta will allow us to understand how Professor Magoha was operating at the executive level.
Talking about education laws, we remember that even before he died, he had just secured another job at Maseno University as a tutor. And this is something that tells us how Professor Magoha took education seriously. So that his knowledge that he had, the knowledge he had gathered from all over the world, he could not sit with it at home. He had offered to come back to the teaching fraternity and offer the same services at Maseno University. We have seen representatives from the university here. Of course, they will, if they get a time, they will be talking about that. How long he taught after leaving that lucrative position in the government. Many people could not do that because after leaving the government, people are used to privileges. Very few people could do that, go back to class and teach. Professor Magoha is a man who had a lot of passion in education, and that's why he opted to go back to Maseno University to offer his services as a tutor and also build the education system in making sure that he contributes largely to the medical field. Again, Lois, it's important to note that some of the people who served with Professor Magoha could just talk about him without fear of contradiction, that he was a no-nonsense man. And therefore, like you said, politicians are still streaming in. And it's not easy to keep politics out of politicians. I do understand that it will not be very easy for the MC to keep politics at bay at this particular funeral. Lazima kidogo itatokea.
I just give him a tip. just ask them to stand up and raise their hands and say hello to Wananchi. I don't know what that would happen. But Moseme, you are touching on how Professor Magoha seems to have this seamless transition from one office to another.
Yes, yes.
We see him starting as a lecturer in Lagos. Later he comes to lecture at the University of Nairobi. He goes on to become the dean of the dean at the University of Nairobi. We see him also becoming the VC. When his term comes to end, we see him transitioning into NEC as the chairperson. When his term also came to an end, we see him transition into a cabinet secretary for education. When that came to an end after the general election, you said he went back to class and he didn't bother after coming from a such high profile and among the biggest jobs in public service in the country. He went back perhaps to where he started. Remember, he started as a lecturer and now he had gone back to class again. But then again, Masame, this shows as the kind of passion that the late professor had, and away from his other accolades, away from his undergraduate degrees, from his master's, from his PhD. This particular Professor George Magoha was a respected human health researcher with his background being in medical training. Now, there was something that he was doing which is very, very interesting, and that is research. He put a lot of research into his life, and he was instrumental in discovering a number of drugs treatment. This shows that he was, as much as he was applying his career day to day in matters education, in matters public service, his number one love, his number one profession, matters education, were key to him. There's this research, a number of researches that he engaged in. We are told that one of the researchers included the cancer of prostate, where Magoha investigated the epidemiology and clinical behavior of prostate cancer in black Africans in a study, and he collaborated with the University of Lagos and of course at the universities across the world. But you see, Magoha was, perhaps this was his way of offering solutions to Africans, because he comes from Africa, offering solutions to Kenyans and others. And you see, his study was tailor-made. This particular study for cancer of the prostate, it was tailor-made in investigating the epidemiology and clinical behavior of prostate cancer in black Africans. That shows Magoha's passion was also in creating solutions. And away from other studies, we see these are the number of scholarly work that he engaged himself in.
Also of importance also to note that cancer of the testicular system, this is something that he carried out. He conducted an extensive research on testicular cancer to determine why the disease is uncommon among black Africans. And he really wanted to also get solutions to this particular disease, because this is a man who was on a mission, like we rightfully mentioned earlier on. He's a man who could mean business, go for it, and he actually got answers. Remember, that was not the only research he did. Yes, he also made a research on the cancer of the penis. This is actually about us and me.
Interesting.
Yes.
And here Magoha conducted research on penile cancer in Africa. Such an interesting conversation. And what he wanted to know if there was a link between this type of cancer and circumcision in adolescents and adults. Yeah?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
This is something that's interesting. This the CV that explains why his CV was as huge as you saw it in Parliament when he turned up for vetting. This is a man whose CV could not even fit in a lorry. I could say that lorry that Azimio la Umoja carried out and presented at the Supreme Court. That is how his CV could look like. This is a man who did everything to make sure that he contributes heavily to the education standards, both in Kenya and even at international standards.
And you see, more summer, clearly Professor Magoha, the late professor, was a bright brain. He was a bright boy right from his young age. But how do you become a professor? And instead of just settling and just operating at your big offices in Nairobi, you yet again dig deeper to start seeing how the knowledge you have acquired on clinical medicine can be of benefit to fellow Africans and humanity in general. And so here we also saw Professor Magoha do a very recent study. He did a very recent study, and I want to imagine this was around the time that he was serving as cabinet secretary. He did a study focusing on HIV protection. Here, he collaborated on the study with the University of Manitoba in Canada and the University of Washington in the United States. The study was conducted in Kisumu, and this study sought to determine the effect of circumcision on the incidence of HIV. So Masame, really, this is Professor just trying to share the information that he had gathered, just trying to share the knowledge that he had gathered, so that even if Magoha is teaching in class, then there is a study, there is a research that he has done that can be used in Kenyan research documents or research programs to offer solutions to clinical African problems. And so he was just not concerned about what was in his head, but he made very many attempts to keep sharing and dispensing information. And even as we lay Professor Magoha to rest, these researchers, they're within the public domain. They're within the government hands. And so even if he's gone, there are reference points. There are areas where the government can borrow in matters of HIV prevention and circumcision. Recently here in Kisumu, he conducted a study determining the effect of circumcision on the incidence of HIV. He also did that research that we talked earlier about cancer of the penis, the testicular system, and prostate cancer. And his concern was the manner in which the disease was manifesting or presenting itself to Africans. Perhaps he noted it's quite different from the Western world. And he was trying to pass a message that perhaps if we do these findings, if we observe the conclusions that he got in that study, perhaps we can offer solutions, especially to the cancer pandemic in the country, which has become quite rampant. And so away from his cabinet secretary duties, away from his class duties, he went ahead to do research, to put his brain and skill into work, and to produce proper research documents to keep supporting clinical medicine, even as we lay him to rest later. Beyond today, we still have footprints of Magoha and works that the government and the Ministry of Education could perhaps reference to, and even the Ministry of Health, and make a stride or two, especially in epidemiology, which is also where he did one of his master's degree.
It also needs some great mind to put into perspective the achievements of Professor Magoha, and that is why you are here. You're also a great lady because you put into perspective some of the research achievements that Professor Magoha made. And he was a very dedicated public servant. This is a man who did a lot of things while he was in office. Professor Magoha, for example, he was a very serious performer. He learned to separate his work and social life during his many years in public service. This is a man who began his medical career modestly as an intern at Lagos University, teaching also in 1978, Lois.
And before you leave there, Masame, do you see how humbly he started? Like every other graduate.
Yes.
He started down there.
Very low.
Yeah? Yes.
In a foreign country.
Yes.
He became a resident surgeon at the same hospital, that is Lagos University Teaching Hospital in 1978. He became a resident surgeon at the same hospital the following year and served with the utmost integrity, Lois, and even fidelity to ethics for 3 years. That was from 1978 to 1981. And this is a man who was dedicated. You can just imagine the kind of students he produced, the kind of medics he produced.
And if he had energy in his 60s, the kind of energy we witnessed, how about when he was a fresh graduate from school?
Now, from 1981, because he had served there for 3 years, 1985, he worked as a senior resident and clinical lecturer at the surgery at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, same place. Professor Magoha was a consultant also, Lois, surgeon and urologist at the First Fountain and Showman Medical Centers, as well as the Motayo Clinic and the Duro Soleil Hospital by 1986. This is a man who dedicated his work to serving humanity, and both in hospital and in class. And that's why, despite the fact that he had served the Kenyan children and teachers at those capacities as the next chairman, as the CS for education, he could still get time and energy at 71 years going back to Maseno University to teach. This is a serious man, and that's why we are here talking about this great man who is going to be laid to rest today.
Yeah, Mosame, and it is at that point that now he decided, let me go back home. Let me take my talents, let me take my strengths. We do not know what exactly made him come back home, but I want to imagine that was part of his motivation, seeing as he's a great public servant, a man who's always willing to dispense the knowledge and the skill that he has. And so in the year 1988, he comes back to Kenya. So he comes with a degree in clinical medicine with his first master's and his wife, Barbara.
What kind of achievement was that? Very great achievement. So therefore, he could not stop there. You have mentioned that he came here back in 1988. His ascension through the ranks was steady but quick. The following year, that was 1989, he was appointed as a senior lecturer in surgery at the university's Department of Surgery. He became an associate professor of surgery at the same university in 1996 before being promoted to full professor in 2000. You get that?
Yes, yes. And so we are seeing him climb up the ladder steadily but surely so. So he comes in as a fresh graduate, having worked in Lagos, Nigeria for like 5 to 7 years, bringing in a lot of skill and expertise. He joins Nairobi University. And even as he continues to serve, he is also studying for other masters and other undergraduate studies. I don't know how he was tackling all this at the same time, but perhaps this also was a cocktail of what he really needed so that he is able to move from point A to point B. And we saw him ascend to the highest possible door at the university level, being the Vice Chancellor of Nairobi University.
Of course, in 2000, then he went to hold a very senior position at the University of Nairobi, including the chair of the academic department of surgery at the University of Nairobi's College of Health Sciences from 1989 to 2000. It's important also to understand that Professor Magoha was appointed Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Nairobi in 2000. He rose to the position of principal at the college in less than 2 years. Look at that.
Yeah. And
the man who was armed with enough education, experience, courage, and even the vigor to work.
Yeah. And so University of Nairobi is also one of those centers of education that will also not forget how Professor Magoha made them feel or how he worked for them. He had quite a number of issues that he did as a VC, and one was to create the university's first ever corporate strategic plan. The university had all along operated without a clear plan, and using these corporate strategic plan, then Nairobi University was able now to have major development activities under now the strong leadership of Professor George Magoha, who is now the late. And we understand away from that, there was also very vigorous activity from the VC then, Professor George Magoha, in ensuring that the employees at the university were evaluated based on their performance. And you see that story of learners have gone to class, a lecturer has not shown up, or a lecturer has shown up for 10 minutes. Those things Professor Magoha started dealing with them at the University of Nairobi, the issue of missing marks. He started addressing all these issues. And I think that is one of the ingredients that gave the University of Nairobi quite a high stature when it comes to institutions of higher learning, especially back then. And these are the new management style that Professor Magoha prioritized. He was also very keen on consultation. We were told by the dons that we were speaking to earlier that he put a lot of consultation, and so it was easy to work under him. But most importantly, Mosame, and this is a problem that the current education sector is facing, especially when it comes to public universities, is the issue of funding. But we see that when Magoha was the VC at Nairobi University, he also did his best to also ensure there is supplement funding coming into the university, and these would help in matters infrastructure, this would help in matters funding. And so we understand there was a time Professor Magoha would even trickle in 25 million from the Korean Medical
These
Institution.
are some of the things that
Yeah.
made the university remain solvent
Yes.
without struggling so much.
Yes,
Because
yes.
remember those days, the capitation to the universities
Yes.
from the government was so small,
Yes.
such that it could not do a lot. But with his leadership skills, he made sure that he outsourced funds from even outside the country.
True, and also in the year 2002, Professor Magoha was able to stream in about 200 million Kenyan shillings, these being from donor funding. And when these monies would trickle into the university, then it meant that the capitation that the university had received from the government would then cover a larger number of pupils, because Professor Magoha would source for funding for research, funding for infrastructure, funding for strategic plan development. And so the little amount that the government gave, then he was able to use these to sort of give a lot of help to many, many learners, thereby a huge number of graduates were able to complete their studies at the University of Nairobi, Mosame. I think that is one of the key points that he did at the universities. Now, when you visit Nairobi University, Professor Magoha's most notable development project at the university also include the 22-story building that is the UON Towers, and he made certain that it was completed on time and within the budget. The university paid 2.3 billion for the tower, and that was through internal funding and donations. Can you imagine? So he gets 2.3 billion in donor aid, in partnership fundings, and he ensures that all of that money.
Lois, I beg
Yeah?
to cut you short kidogo.
Yes, please.
This is the vibrant Elisha Odhiambo, the MP for
The
Kem,
resident MP, eh?
and is moving the crowds there.
Okay, okay.
He
Oh,
just
the
finished.
speeches are the
So
speeches have just
politicians,
begun.
I think it seems they're going to get some time to give the speeches here. We actually understand that this is would be a heated funeral,
Yeah, yeah.
and it will be very important that we slowly move
We also
to the other
capture
side
the political
and listen
moments.
to these politicians who
Yeah.
are now taking on the podium. Remember, after the speeches, the church will take over
Yeah.
to quickly do a short service, and then maybe transfer the service to the church, and then do a quick funeral service that will then lead to the burial of the late Professor George Omore Magoha. Remember, we do understand that we are coming to you live from this particular campus here in Yala, where the